Okay, we have had brilliant foreign ministers of different kinds. I mean, look at the language MEA uses now. Jaishankar ji, he is literally bulldozing out. Ab baat karo, he will flatten you out. Jaishankar is a very powerful speaker, a very assertive man. The foreign ministry, okay, I mean, Vajpayee for that matter was a great orator. Multilateralism has a certain autonomous logic of its own. See Raja Mohan, okay, he is a main brain IR वगैरह में. But it can rarely transcend the dynamics among the great powers. Multilateralism has a certain autonomous logic of its own, but it can rarely transcend the dynamics among the great powers. ये sentence समझ में आ रहा है? What is multilateralism? Because see, Kyoto हो, UNFCCC है, Rio है, Montreal है. Okay, you talk about even this क्या था इसका वाला WTO है. Okay, all of these are multilateral treaties. They all agreements between countries. Sustainable development was among the huge ones. ठीक है? So multilateralism मतलब क्या है? When there are multiple players and they are collaborating is multilateralism. And he says multilateralism का अपना एक dynamic, अपना एक autonomous approach. मतलब okay, on its own it can move in some ways. Okay, it says that it has an autonomous logic of its own. It has a mind of its own. कभी ये करेगा, कभी वो करेगा. But he says that it can rarely transcend the dynamics of the great powers. मतलब in multilateralism, there are many players, and they are interacting, okay, among themselves. But there could be a very powerful player here. He says, in multilateralism, the shifts are autonomous. Kabhi ye ho jayega, kabhi ye hai. But the equations can't escape this big power. So whether you like it or not, the fact is, the US is a very big power. The Russia is a very big power, and of course, China has emerged as a main contender. आप जितनी भी बात कर लो multilateralism की, yes, कभी इंडिया की तरफ, कभी ब्राजील की तरफ, कभी साउथ अफ्रीका की तरफ, okay, sometimes China, sometimes Southeast Asia, ASEAN की तरफ में, it happens. But it can't escape the relationship with respect to US, Russia, and China. Okay, and it says ahead बोलते हैं, it says, when great powers cooperate, multilateralism has reasonable chances of success. When great powers cooperate, multilateralism has reasonable chances of success. And when they don't, failures loom large. And when they don't, failures loom large. 3 decades of relative harmony among major powers after the end of the Cold War, produced significant advances in multilateralism. Today, as the great powers get at each other's throat, the prospects for multilateral agreements have diminished. अब इस context में आप सारे conventions को देखेंगे, आप सारे treaties को देखेंगे. Okay? Now see, 85, 90, 91. This was the phase when the Cold War comes to an end with the collapse of USSR and the fall of Berlin Wall. ये बहुत ही important phase था. इसके पहले, okay, you talk about 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. ये एकदम peak of Cold War. I'm talking about John F. Kennedy. I'm talking about Ronald Reagan. Okay, एकदम peak of Cold War है. Okay, और ऐसे Cold War के times में, this is the Cold War between the Soviet Russia and between the US. Okay, US of course was more or less the NATO. इस type के Cold War में ना कोई भी agreements होना बहुत मुश्किल है. Okay, कि सब जो, because the world is divided. Okay, एक third front खुला हुआ है called as NAM. ठीक है, NAM does something but not really powerful enough to impact the narrative here. इस टाइम में कुछ कोऑपरेशन होना बहुत मुश्किल है. दैट्स व्हाई वी से द 1983 में हमने जो साइन किया अंक्लॉस, एंड इन द टाइम व्हेन द कोल्ड वॉर एकदम पीक में था, कि डिलिबरेशंस अंक्लॉस का शुरू कब हुआ? 50s में शुरू हुआ है अंक्लॉस. 50s, 60s, 70s, 30 years of negotiation, and in times when the cold war एकदम हाइट में है. UNCLOS is a miracle. ये कैसे हो पाया? Such a brilliant treaty which is balanced in many ways, और अभी भी strong enduring है. Okay. Otherwise if you see, जितने भी important treaties हुए, major जितने भी हुए हैं, ये सब 90s के हैं, late 80s के हैं. Montreal, okay, 1987, okay, Rio Summit, WTO is 1991-92 की बात हो रही है. The GATT and the WTO. Okay, you talk about okay, all the important institutions, whether you talk about the effectiveness of course ये पहले बन चुके थे, but how active the activeness of IMF, of the World Bank, the whole idea of trade blocks, ASEAN भी आता है इसी टाइम में. Okay, so if you look at ये जो phase था, when the Cold War ends, lot of multilateral treaties come up. Political phase में इस phase को बोलते हैं the phase of global cooperation, the phase of global cooperation. और इस time में क्या हुआ? एक और important point ये था, when USSR was there, so they always were fighting. USSR said Americans are evil, and Americans said Russians are evil. And when the Cold War ended, okay, and I hope you know, ये Cold War में एक philosophy था called as MAD. सुना आपने MAD philosophy? MAD philosophy is mutually assured destruction. आप मुझे गोली मारोगे, मैं आपको गोली मार दूंगा. You bomb me, I'll bomb you back. Okay, mutually assured destruction, which was a very powerful deterrent. कि भाई बॉम्ब क्यों नहीं हुआ यहाँ पर? Because both were scared. If I bomb one area, the other guys will come and bomb me. It's called as the MAD principle, mutually assured destruction. Okay, so this was a kind of a balance. एक टाइप का बैलेंस था. Okay, कि कोई किसी का पल्ला भारी नहीं हो रहा था. It was a balance. It was in some ways good. कि despite the animosity, because a balance था, that's why we did not have a war. झगड़ा होता था एज में, अब लड़ लेंगे, but nothing happened. ठीक है. But when USSR collapsed, it was kind of a symbolic victory for US and NATO, but the world got a bit scared. क्या यार, पहले तो कम से कम US was being challenged by USSR. अब तो इनको कोई नहीं रोकने वाला है, ये जो भी कर लेंगे. Okay, there's a lot of narration around कि US might misuse its power. तो अब इसमें क्या हुआ? The US, okay, it went out of the way to comfort the world कि no, we are very responsible people. बदमाश तो रशियंस थे, हम तो अच्छे लोग हैं. डेमोक्रेसी है, ग्रोथ है, लैंड ऑफ लिबर्टी है, फ्रीडम है, ह्यूमन राइट्स हैं. So USA, okay, went out of the way to prove that they are a very responsible superpower. And USA ये सब होने दिया कि रियो साइन कर लेते हैं, क्योटो भी कर लेते हैं, WTO भी बना लेते हैं. Okay, I hope you got the point here. So this is why we say it's a phase of global cooperation. अगर USA participate नहीं करता, none of this was possible. In fact, the whole development towards Rio happened because of the US ultimately. GATT agreement से जब WTO बना, again US was doing it. That's why I'm saying that in a multilateral world, okay, dynamics shift होते रहते हैं, but the great powers continue to dominate. So whatever you are seeing is a consequence of some kind of global cooperation happening. ये cooperation 21st century में collapse हो गया है. Okay, so 30 years it says, for 30 years, 1990s, 2000 and the first phase of 21st century, 2008-10 तक. पहले बार हमारा हिला है 2008 के फाइनेंशियल क्राइसिस में. I hope you know that, something called as subprime crisis. Subprime crisis के बाद में things happened very different. उसके बाद में the rise of China and whatever happened उसके बाद. So now the success of Rio Summit, the success of WTO, the success of okay, all these multilateral agreements now depends on how these great powers play out in the global arena. Because see, if Paris Agreement के तहत अगर responsibility नहीं लिया developed countries ने, okay, then there's no chance of the global warming agenda succeeding in mitigation efforts. Okay, if Europe is always at loggerheads, और यही time था, when all things was calming down, तभी आपका European Union बना फिर ultimately. Okay, otherwise European Union is a very old project. चला आ रहा है, होगा, अब होगा, तब होगा. Unified currency आ गया, euro आ गया. So this was a very interesting phase. The 1990s and the first phase of 21st century was often called as the phase of global cooperation. इसी time में the whole mantra of globalization, okay, is catching a steam. Technology, IT revolution, okay, talk about stock market का open trade, ये सब इसी phase में हो रहा है. And a very important phase was कि political instability नहीं था world में, because USSR has collapsed and USA trying to prove itself as a very, very responsible superpower. हम सबसे अच्छे हैं, we are the best one, and वो concession देना शुरू कर दिया कि चलो यार तुम भी कर लो, यार तुम भी कर लो. It's like, ज़्यादा होता है ना, शादी के टाइम में ज़्यादा खुश होके लड्डू बांट रहे हैं तो बांट रहे हैं, यहाँ पर घर बिक गया टाइप्स. ठीक है, तो यूएस का they went on an overdrive. ठीक है, now things have changed. The success of sustainable development, the success of the climate mitigation strategies, the success of biodiversity conventions, ये सब depend करेगा ultimately on what happens in the geopolitical arena. झगड़ा हो गया और क्या, चाइना बोला मैं बनूंगा पावरफुल, रशिया बहुत दुखी बैठा रहा 20 साल, इकोनॉमिक डाउनटर्न हो गया, रशिया में गरीबी आ गई, रशिया से, एंड उसके साथ में प्यूटिन आ गए. प्यूटिन से आई वांट टू गो बैक टू माय ग्लोरी डेज ऑफ सोवियत एम्पायर. वो नॉस्टैल्जिक हो गए. हमारे गोल्डन एज ऑफ गुप्ता एम्पायर थे, प्यूटिन के लिए गोल्डन एज ऑफ सोवियत एम्पायर है, उनको वापस करना है. सो नाउ अमेरिका इज बीइंग चैलेंज्ड. व्हेन द चैलेंज स्टार्ट्स, that's when whole agenda now gets awry. So abhi problem is around the geopolitical aspects. The problem is around that lack of trust. So if you look at the development post first decade of the 21st century, I'm talking about say 2008 mein, you have the subprime crisis. The subprime crisis, ye pehla global level में financial shakeout हुआ, with the banks collapsing, Lehman Brothers going bust. This was पहला झटका लगा आपको ये वाला. इसके बाद में the world has not recovered completely. Japanese issues, German recession चलता आया है, और जो कुछ बचा कुचा था, the China's ambition starts. China's ambition, but China for almost 30 years kept quiet. China का reforms कब हुआ है? Remember the year? No. Reform was 1978. Start हुआ उनका, the new China. So 80s में चुप रहे, 90s में चुप रहे पूरा, and the first part of 21st century में चुप रहे ये लोग. So 30-40 years तक they said we are building the economy, and when they now become powerful, उनका सारा शुरू होता है game. So Xi is a very different gene. Not what the earlier leaders of China were. The China ka ambition rise hua. Then what happened was Russia. Parallelly, Russia is now nostalgic about the Soviet era. And this is synonymous with the rise of Putin. So Putin is that aggressive alpha male for Soviet empire. यहाँ से आपका, and इसके ऊपर में what happened was, the developing countries, I think since again 2008 was the major event. इस crisis के बाद में the developing countries now are becoming more and more assertive, because देखो जो globalization था, the globalization that we talk about, this globalization का एक बहुत अहम, very important agenda was free and fair trade. This was like slogan of the globalization era that we signed, and which became the mantra for the WTO. But by the time we come to this phase, what has happened is we realized कि इतना free fair है नहीं. There are a lot of clauses which are trapping us. In a lot of ways, the developed world can block our economy. कभी environment के नाम में रोक दिया, कभी child labor के नाम में रोक दिया, कभी health के नाम में रोक दिया. Okay, blue box, amber box. I hope you know those terms. Okay, so developing countries realize कि यार ये तो गड़बड़ हो रहा है. You are actually misleading us in all these years of WTO reforms. So developing worlds get assertive. Okay, यहीं से शुरू होता है the rise of the third bloc. The rise of the third bloc. उसका एक important element हो गया आपका the BRIC countries. Okay, of course, Russia is not a developing country, but anti-US coalition में Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa now become a very powerful bloc. Okay, it is in this context you must understand that multilateralism emerged to ho raha hai, but the conflicts are starting. Okay, so this is these circumstances may what happened is now multilateralism is starting, and there are possibilities of conflicts, possibilities of disagreements, of conflicts and disagreements. ये पूछना था क्या हुआ, what changed? कि ऐसा क्या हुआ that the geopolitics of the world has now changed post first decade of 21st century. इस phase में when this is, so now there is lot of skepticism. ये पता नहीं whether we will actually cooperate or not. Yes, whether we will actually be able to deliver on the promises or not. Okay, so इस context में now if you see almost all international and global treaties are now challenged. That's the context in which Raja Mohan writes कि multilateralism का अपना dynamics है, but they can't escape the power play of the great powers. Multilateralism में many countries are assertive. India assertive हो रहा है. I mean, look at the language our MEA uses now. Jaishankar ji, he is literally bulldozing out. आप बात करो, he will flatten you out. Okay, कि आपका interest है, India has nobody types. ठीक है? So very strong assertiveness. ऐसे कभी India कभी ऐसे नहीं बोला था. But he says, fine, you have forced us to take this ground. I was seeing an interview yesterday where he says, okay, that what you are doing is not for the global welfare and sacrifice. वही कर रहे हो आप लोग कर रहे हो whatever is suiting you, okay, whatever is convenient for you. जहाँ convenient है आप कहते हो चलो यार poverty कम कर देते हैं, जहाँ convenient है चलो यार we will do this, नहीं convenient है you continue whatever you want to do. Okay, we have had brilliant foreign ministers of different kinds. The best though, it's too early to comment. The foreign ministry, okay, I mean Vajpayee for that matter was a great orator. You know, ये हमारा problem है that we jump to conclusions in a very short phase. Okay, Jaishankar is a very powerful speaker, a very assertive man, but don't say he was the best minister ever. Okay, so that's too quick a judgment. रुक जाओ 15-20 साल के बाद पता चलेगा, look back what good or bad we had done. ठीक है? But yes, he is among the definitely a different type of a breed altogether.